In this video, I'm going to explain why you should no longer believe Gary Taubes. If you want to control what you eat, control your body, and control your mind, then hit the subscribe button so you never miss a video. I remember I first read Gary Taubes back in 2008, 2009. It was Good Calories, Bad Calories. It's a great book. It reads like a story. It's a page turner. I just kept reading it, and it changed the way that I thought about nutrition. He was a real maverick. He came out with this article back in 2002, 2003, somewhere in that time frame, and it was an article in the New York Times Magazine called "What If It Was All a Big Fat Lie?" And he challenged the prevailing wisdom of the nutrition and obesity research industry that said that dietary cholesterol increased our risk for heart attacks and heart disease. That turned out not to be true, and I agree with Gary Taubes on that. That was a failed hypothesis. But then Gary Taubes started to come out with his own theory of obesity, and I call it the carbohydrate insulin theory of obesity. In other words, when we eat carbohydrates, it elicits our pancreas to secrete insulin into our body. Insulin lowers our blood sugar levels, and it shuttles all of those carbohydrates into our fat cells. And according to Gary Taubes, insulin kind of sequesters all of this energy in the fat cells, and it compels us to overeat. In other words, we overeat because we're getting fat, and insulin has this ability to just store all of this fat into our fat cells, and then we never get the signal that we're full, and it compels us to keep eating more. There is almost no good research to support this, but he continues to champion this idea. So I'm going to tell you why I don't really listen to Gary Taubes anymore. The first reason I don't listen to Gary Taubes anymore is his own nonprofit. He created this nonprofit called Nutrition Science Initiative, or NuSI for short, and it got $40 million in grants to do 3 studies. It was created in the fall of 2012, 2013, and by 2015 it had pretty much disbanded. One of the founders left quietly at the end of 2015 without any mention from NuSI. And according to public records, Gary Taubes made several $100,000 off of this whole initiative. He claimed that he was working 60 or 70 hours a week, and if you don't believe me, you can actually look up these tax returns because that's what all nonprofits have to do. Makes me wonder what he was doing with all that time. The first study to come out was the Energy Balance Consortium or something like that in 2016. It was led by an NIH researcher named Kevin Hall, and that study actually contradicted what Gary Taubes said. So his own initiative contradicts what he's trying to prove to people. Taubes approved Hall before the study and then had nothing but bad things to say about him when Hall didn't find the results that Taubes wanted. The second study that came out in early 2018 by Chris Gardner at Stanford University also found that there was no difference in weight loss between low carb and low fat diets. Your own initiative failed, Gary. Think about that. $40 million mainly from the Linda and John Hall Foundation. It just makes you wonder where all that money went. In short, NuSI was a total fiasco. The second reason I no longer listen to Gary Taubes, and you shouldn't either, is the debate he had with Stephan Guyenet. Stephan Guyenet is an actual researcher who seems to understand biochemistry and physiology and nutrition at a very deep level. Guyenet is the author of a book called The Hungry Brain, which unfortunately has not sold as many copies as Gary Taubes' books like Good Calories, Bad Calories, The Case Against Sugar, and Why We Get Fat. I read his second book, Why We Get Fat, in the fall of 2011, and I actually went paleo for a while, and I completely eschewed carbohydrates, and I remember writing an essay to myself called Why I'm No Longer a Vegetarian. Thank you, Gary Taubes, for doing that. Now, I finally came to my senses and started eating carbohydrates again, and I'm no longer doing paleo, but it just goes to show how powerful his books were. His debate with Guyenet was just painful to watch. Taubes had no good arguments, and he kept saying stuff like, "You have to ask the right questions, Stephen." He made no sense. He was completely illogical. Stephan Guyenet had 50 pages of references to prove his point. Gary Taubes had none. The only good argument that Taubes had was this idea of double burden. He found cases where there was obesity and places where there was actual famine. So his question is, how could mothers be obese when their children were starving? It's a good question to ask. But he's like someone who claims a miracle when he doesn't have a naturalistic explanation for something. The best answer is we don't know. We don't know what was going on. We don't know what they were eating. People weren't keeping food logs. They didn't have food trackers. They weren't weighing their food. We just don't know. But to say that somehow there is this alternative explanation for obesity, or it's somehow the people in this time frame in this location violated the laws of thermodynamics, it makes no sense. Taubes has spent the last 15 years looking for black swans to contradict the standard hypothesis of obesity. Taubes rejects the energy balance hypothesis, which is still the prevailing hypothesis, and the reason why is because it's true and all the research points towards it. Every time he finds a black swan, we find more data that shows that it wasn't a black swan after all. Taubes spends all of his time looking for obscure populations that violate the energy balance hypothesis. My guess is he'll spend the rest of his life doing just that. Taubes talks about the Pima Indians and ignores the fact that the Pima Indians in the southwest United States and Mexico ate largely a vegetarian diet before they were introduced to the Western diet. The Western diet is high carb but also high in fat, and it's also very tasty and palatable and easy to eat. Taubes ignores all of this and just says, well, it was all the carbs. No, it wasn't all the carbs. It was the fact that they stopped moving and they started eating cheap, convenient food. If you want to watch that debate, I'll put a link in the description box below. I'll also put an iCard in the video so you can watch it. I'm not going to lie, it's 2.5 hours and it's painful. I'll save you the 2.5 hours and tell you that Guillain won. The third reason you should no longer listen to Gary Taubes is that he insults all of the obesity researchers. Taubes in his debate with Guillain said that obesity research are phase locked, meaning they're wedded to this hypothesis they have. They're wedded to the energy balance hypothesis, which Taubes says is wrong. The reason why most researchers subscribe to that hypothesis is because that's where all the conclusions point to. When people cut calories, they lose weight. When they add calories, they gain weight. It's not a secret. The big question is, why do some people become obese and others not? And the answer isn't because some are lazy and others aren't. The truth is, Gary Taubes himself is phase locked. He's wedded to this hypothesis because he's made a lot of money doing this. He gets paid for speeches, he gets paid for books, and if he ever came out and said, no, my hypothesis was wrong, he would have to admit that he has wasted the last 20 years of his career. Taubes has a strong ideological bias. He's doing exactly what he's criticizing other researchers for. I am convinced that there is no study in the world that would convince Taubes otherwise. The National Weight Loss Registry, which showed that most people who lost weight were following a low-fat diet. The Women's Health Initiative, which showed that people who ate a low-fat diet or a diet that was low in energy density also consumed the fewest calories and lost the most weight. The next reason is Taubes keeps promoting a theory that has never been validated in studies, but it's never been validated in real life. Just think about your own life. If you want to lose weight, what do? You moderate your portions, you become more aware of what you're eating, you cut out some of the processed food, you don't eat out as much. What you do is you lower the caloric density of what you're eating and you reduce the portions that you're eating. And voila, you lose weight. Our everyday experience shows that. It has nothing to do with insulin. The people in Japan and China and the Philippines, or the people in Peru who eat 200 varieties of potatoes, in Bolivia who eat quinoa. What about every major civilization that is based on some principal crop? Humans thrive on grains. We need grains to survive. Civilization itself needs grains. That's in my previous video on insulin and why you shouldn't fear insulin, but I'm going to reinforce this point again. Every civilization is based on a principal grain, and billions of people today continue to eat them and they're not obese. I once read somewhere that Taubes said that people in Japan are fit and lean because they eat brown rice, not white rice. Well, I have news for you. Brown rice is mainly carbohydrate. At the end of good calories, bad calories, Taubes is emphatic. He says the more carbs we consume, the fatter we get, and the fewer carbs we consume, the leaner we'll be. If this were true, everybody on the keto diet would be super lean and all the vegans and vegetarians would be overweight. That's clearly not the case. I know plenty of vegans and vegetarians and even people who do the raw fruit diet who are super lean, sometimes even too lean. I was reading a book called The Blue Zones, and it documents people around the world who have high rates of centenarians, meaning 1 or 2% of the population is over 100 years old. And the author of that book, Dan Buettner from National Geographic, goes to Costa Rica, Southern California, Corsica, Okinawa, and he examines their lifestyles. All of them eat high carb diets. They eat starches, they drink wine, and they eat plenty of fruits and vegetables. I'm not saying any of them are vegans and vegetarians other than the Seventh-day Adventists in Orange County, California, but most of them don't eat large amounts of meat. My next point is various studies over the years, not including NuSI's studies, have shown that Taubes' hypothesis is wrong. The National Weight Loss Registry from 2009-2010 showed that most people who lost weight and kept it off followed a low-fat diet. The Women's Health Initiative from a few years ago also showed that people on a low-fat diet also consumed fewer calories and lost more weight. My favorite one is the study they did back in 2010-2011 with the rats and the journal Obesity. They fed 4 different groups of rats, different diets. The rats that gained the least amount of weight were the ones that ate the most sucrose or sugar. The rats that gained the most weight were the ones that ate the cafeteria diet, which consisted of foods like Fruit Loops and chocolate milk, high in fat, high in carbohydrates, and very low in protein. What's most interesting is that the rats who ate the high fat diet had a lot more liver damage and gained a lot more weight than the rats on the high sugar diet. Now, I know these are rats, but rats have a pancreas, they have insulin, they have fat cells, they have a hypothalamus. Their metabolic system is basically the same as ours. The rats that ate the most sugar also gained the least amount of weight. This contradicts Taubes' hypothesis. The more carbs we eat, the fatter we get because it's all about insulin. Clearly, that's not the case. That leads me to my last point. You don't need insulin to get fat. I challenge you to drink olive oil, eat tons of avocados, eat a pound of nuts, and eat 3 sticks of butter a day. You'll be very full, but you'll also be very fat. It takes no energy to convert dietary fat into stored triglycerides. Insulin is just one of many hormones in the body that regulate appetite and metabolism, and we shouldn't focus on one to explain obesity. It's kind of like Robert Lustig, who says that fructose is the cause of all of our health problems. Physiology is complex, and to say that one chemical or one hormone is the cause of obesity is really simplistic. Taubes likes to present himself as this unbiased science writer, but he's really not. He has a strong ideological bias. Imagine what would happen if he admitted that his hypothesis was wrong. I believe Taubes will defend his ideas to the grave. There is no study, no level of evidence that will convince him otherwise. The studies he funded contradicted his own beliefs. We have metabolic ward studies which show that weight gain is directly proportional to the number of calories that you consume. Taubes wants objectivity in science, and he can start with himself. I think the best thing Taubes could do is admit that he was wrong and move on. And the best thing you could do is stop reading his books and stop listening to what he says. Sorry, Gary, you lost. I hope you found this video provocative and educational. If you want to stop binge eating, stop overeating, or you want to control what you eat, head to my website, saneaters.com. I have some free training there that will show you how I stopped overeating and binge eating after 10 years. And if you want to speak with me, there is a link in the description box below. And don't forget to check out some of my other videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. And don't read Gary.